If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of 3. Join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth and postnatal recovery, helping you have a wonderful pregnancy and afterbirth experience. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Well, hello and welcome everyone to the Fitness Mama podcast. Today we are chatting all things breastfeeding, in particular when babies are distracted and fussy at the breast. So this episode is with the lovely Susie Prout, who is a registered midwife and international board certified lactation consultant. Susie lives in Perth, WA, and is a mum of 3 small children. Susie runs the online Breastfeeding Success membership, which teaches pregnant ladies and new mums how to breastfeed with ease and supports them along the way. Before we dive into this brilliant episode, do stay tuned, but I would like to invite you to give Fitness Mama podcast a rating and review. So if you have been loving these episodes, if you've been finding them useful or helpful in any way, by giving a rating and review on the podcast app, it allows the podcast to reach more people who might also find it useful in their motherhood journey. So if you have an iPhone, just head to the podcast app, search Fitness Mama, then scroll all the way to the bottom to rate and review. And if you would like me to give you a shout out on Instagram, leave your Instagram handle so that we can connect. So thank you so much, everyone. I hate asking for ratings and reviews. It just does not come naturally, but it is amazing how it really helps the algorithm and it does help the podcast get found by more amazing ladies. So let's dive into this episode. Thank you, Susie, for joining me today. It's great to have you on as our first ever returning guest.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be back and I'm excited to chat with all of your listeners about what they're concerned with.
Yeah, so the first time we chatted, which for anyone listening, it's the second episode. So you have to scroll all the way back. It's over a year ago now. And we talked about preparing to breastfeed. So the episode was focused on pregnant mums. So today it's so exciting to chat because we're going to be talking about new mums and babies and in particular fussy breastfeeding. So it's a big topic. And the reason we're talking about fussy feeding is because I put out a question box on Instagram and this is what pretty much all of the questions were about. So it's a perfect topic. So thank you. If you follow us on Instagram, thank you for your amazing questions. So to start off with, what do you classify as fussy feeding?
Fussy feeding can happen right at the beginning of your breastfeeding journey, or it can happen at any time. And there's different reasons, depending on how old your baby is, why your baby would be fussing. So I would think of a fussy feeder more towards the 3 to 4 months and older. And I would think of a baby who's being fussy in the newborn age, not because they're fussing, but because there is a reason. There's a reason with their latch, there's a reason with the supply, there might be a reason with positioning. Very different to a baby who has fed well. And then as they start to be more aware of their surroundings and they become more alert and know what they want and they don't want, they become fussy. So we've got 2 different types of, I guess you could call, fussy feeding.
Oh, that's interesting. So a lot of us perhaps are calling it fussy feeding because they're fussing, but what would you call it if it's that newborn phase, those first few months?
I would call that like a breastfeeding problem or a supply issue or an attachment issue. I would look at if your baby is fussing and not happy at the breast, it's not because they're being fussy. So we need to work out why it is. So I would look at the reason and then we would call it what the reason it could be. So if you've got a baby who is relatively, in the first 6 weeks and is fussing in terms of pulling on and off the breast. So they go on, they may suck for 10 seconds and they pull off, or they go on and they cry and they're flailing their little arms and legs around. They never seem to just have one of those sleepy, happy, relaxed feeds. That can happen for a few reasons. The first, it can happen if you've got an oversupply of milk. So when you have a new baby, they suck, swallow is what they do. And they have a tiny little mouth and they have a tiny little tummy and they're not used to all this milk coming out. And if you suddenly have a huge milk supply, they will go onto the breast, get all this milk in their mouth, get really stressed out and pull off. And then they'll be like, oh, but I'm actually really hungry. I want more. And so then they'll go back on and the same thing will happen. And they'll keep doing that and look like they're really unhappy. And you as a mum will look down and think, I've got all this milk. It's falling out of their mouth. It's spraying everywhere. What could be wrong? And it actually is, because you've got all this milk and it's spraying everywhere and there's too much of it. And if you have an oversupply, you would usually see that happening in the first few minutes of your feed, because that's when you have the letdown. So baby may go on and be quite happy for the first 60 seconds before the milk actually comes out. Then the milk starts to spray out with force. So those 3 minutes after that, your baby is literally
gasping. I remember my baby gasping and trying to catch up with the flow.
And then it kind of calms down and your baby gets into the feed and likes the slower flow, and you can kind of continue. And then the other side of it, though, is, and this is why you need to have an IBCLC to diagnose whatever this is, because the other side could be an undersupply. So your baby's really hungry, gone on, the letdown happens, and it's a bit piddly and it's not really enough for your baby. So your baby is on and off crying, these same things, hitting the breast, pulling up their legs, looks like they keep moving their heads from side to side. Then they go back on because they want more, but there's not enough there for them. So they do the same type of thing, but it's because they want more milk. And then the other reason that a baby will look like they're fussing at the breast in the early days is with a tongue tie. So with a tongue tie, your baby can't clasp the nipple and the areola with their tongue properly. And so they just can't get on and stay on, and they're not comfortable on. So you'll find them nipple feeding quite a lot. So they'll be doing those shallow feeds. And when you have a baby who's nipple feeding, firstly, you're in a lot of pain because they're damaging your nipple. But secondly, they're not able to actually massage the breast with their mouth. So they're not actually able to initiate a letdown or get enough milk through. So those babies are really fussy at the breast and they just don't seem to ever get it. And a lot of mums will say they just don't get it. They're not understanding how to breastfeed. There's something wrong with them. And it's not something wrong with them. It's something wrong with their tongue, in that it's pulled down to the bottom of their mouth and they can't lift it up enough and out enough to help with the breast. So those would be the three main reasons. We then have reasons of positioning. So you might be holding your baby in a position that's actually hurting your baby. So it depends how your baby's been born. They might have had a forceps delivery. They might have had quite a heavy vacuum on their head. They might have some pain down the one side. And if you're holding them in a position that's hurting them, again, they'll be fussing because they're like, I want the milk, but I don't want to be held like this. And so those are probably the reasons I would say, if you're looking at fussing, those would be the reasons. Your baby's not just fussing because they're fussing for no reason. There's a reason there in those early days, and we can fix that reason and they'll go on their merry way.
The tricky part is finding the right reason. Is that right?
Yeah. So a lot of the time girls will have a baby that is feeding okay but fussing. So, they are breastfeeding, but they then will start to think, okay, something's wrong. I'm going to get onto Google. I'm going to ask my friends. I'm going to go into some forums, and people will say, oh, yes, my baby did that, and that was because of oversupply or this or that. And then people think that, and then you think one thing and it's another. And until you go and see someone who can actually look at exactly what's going on, it can be quite tricky.
And at what stage do you start to consider food intolerances? Because I know a lot of mums who start to restrict their diet, trying to find a reason for the fussiness.
Yeah, so a baby who's fussing at the breast, that's not related to a food intolerance. If a baby has reflux symptoms, fussy, colicky off the breast, then we can be, okay, so why have they got these behaviours and what's going on? But if they're fussy at the breast, it's not to do with the intolerance. However, they could be fussy all the time. I mean, they could be fussy on the breast and off the breast. And with intolerances, And allergies, if you think of cow's milk protein intolerance, it's overdiagnosed hugely and it's self-diagnosed. And I will have seen countless ladies who I'll go to their house and they'll say, I've gone off dairy and gluten and red foods, and they're on about 4 different types of foods just because they've taken it upon themselves to take away all these things. If you have a concern with an intolerance and you were to see a pediatric dietitian, someone who specializes, an allergist, someone who specializes in pediatrics, they would look at, okay, the usual suspects would be dairy, would be soy, and then they would put you on a plan because you need to be off these foods for at least 10 to 14 days before you would see any difference. There's lots of chopping and changing that mums do because they're feeling helpless. I mean, yeah, absolutely. But I think that jumping into intolerance really early can really damage a breastfeeding relationship because we don't know that it's that. And often they'll think, oh, baby's got a bit of green poo. They must be allergic to something, where it's just probably nothing.
Okay, so let's move into fussy feeders over 3 months old then. So what are the common reasons and signs of fussy feeders in the older baby age group?
Yeah, so you'd have a baby who's feeding really well in those early days, the first 3 to 4 months, and you'd be going along your merry way and there'd be no issues. And then we talk a lot about the 4-month sleep regression, or progression as we call it, where babies start to realize a bit more cause and effect. So a newborn is not going to understand cause and effect. They're not going to understand when they get to the breast and they suck and the milk is coming out. They're just sucking because they're at the breast and it's their reflex that they do. But when they get older and they go to the 4 months, they are more alert. They start to understand cause and effect. They do something and something's going to happen to them. They start to understand that they could be fed in different ways. So they could be having a bottle and a breast, and they could start to prefer one over the other and start making a conscious choice if that's what they want. And they start to have more playtime. So baby will have their sleep, they'd have their feed, they'd have their playtime, they'd have their sleep again. And it becomes a little bit more regimented. Not that you're in a routine, but you are having a bit more alert time. And so all this happens, and they're doing a lot of growing at that stage. And then they'll start to become fussy at the breast. And so one of the most common reasons to be fussy at the breast around that time is when you're giving bottles and breast. And so if you give too many bottles in those early days, and I'm not against bottle feeding at all. I actually quite like breastfeeding mums to teach their babies to be able to have a bottle so that their baby knows how to take one. And so when you're going back to work or when you're doing bits and pieces and baby gets older, you're not then in the, I'm now having a baby who's refusing the bottle. So it is good. But if you're giving too many bottles and you're mixed feeding, I guess you could call it, it all could be going swimmingly well, but no baby I have come across is ever going to mix feed well their whole breastfeeding, feeding relationship. There will become a time when they start to prefer one or the other. And 9 times out of 10, they prefer a bottle. A bottle is simple for them because the milk is coming out the same way, the same amount, the same flow, where a breast is very different in that you have to work for your milk. You've got a minute or so of no milk coming out, then you've got a lot, then it's a little bit, different amounts of milk coming out. And breastfeeding is more than nutrition. It's comfort, it's warmth, it's if you're wanting to bond, there's so much falling asleep, there's so much more. So they're very different. The way that your baby sucks on a bottle and the way that your baby sucks on the breast are like chalk and cheese. You can't even compare them. And so that would be the main reason, the baby having a bottle preference. The other reason is that your baby needs to have a pre-feed routine. Not a routine in terms of feed every 3 hours. You still want to demand feed, but you want to have a time that your baby knows that it's feed time. Because if you think about it as an adult, if you were suddenly just, driving your car and then someone just stuffed a piece of food in your mouth and you weren't aware that it was happening, you'd be like, what's going on? And so if your baby is in playtime, playing with their toys on the ground, and you literally just walk over, pick your baby up and try and get them to feed in their playtime, they're going to be like, well, I don't want to feed now because that feeding on the breast is so much more. It's sleepy. I need to calm down now and I need to do all this stuff. And so then they start to push away.
I'd never thought about it like that, but that just makes so much sense. And the number of times I just did whisk my baby and tried to chuck him on the boob, really good. I like that.
So what you need to do is you need to have a pre-feed routine. And so what that would mean is, okay, so you think, right, I'm going to feed my baby when they wake up from their naps. I'm going to do more of a sleep, then you're going to feed, then you're going to play. Or you could do it the other way. You could feed to sleep. That's fine. Whatever, or you could do both, whatever you wanted. But you can't do a feed in the middle of the playtime. That's not a feed time. So you would think, okay, if I'm going to do my feed when baby goes to sleep, I'm going to pick up my baby when it's time. I'm going to say the same words. I'm going to say it's feed time, milk time now. I'm going to walk to the room. I'm going to close the curtains the same way. We're going to sing the same song. We're going to put the sleep suit on. We're going to dim the lights. I'm going to sit in the same chair, and I'm going to do exactly the same routine every single time I feed. And so your baby knows that as soon as you sing that song and you walk to the nursery, that they're getting ready to have their feed. And at the same time, if you were doing it when they woke up from their nap, you don't get them out of their room. You stay in there. It's the same, whatever you want to do. You make up your own routine, but it's the same thing.
And if you're out and about, can you do, like if you're in your bedroom, the bedroom, for example, and you've got a particular routine, it might be that you're giving a certain comforter for them to hold when it's feed time, so that when you're out and about, you can't replicate everything, obviously, but you could do just, say the same words and give them their little comforter, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you would do as much as you can, but it's important that when you are out and about, you're feeding at the time that you would be feeding normally at home. So if your baby was going to be having a nap and it was 10 a.m. and it was time for their nap, you would do the feed before their nap when you were out. You wouldn't just willy-nilly give them a feed when they're in their awake time, unless they asked for it. I mean, this is just, the bare minimum. But then you would do, if they were in their awake time and they came up to you and they wanted to feed, fine. This is only for babies. This is not for everyone. This is only for babies who are having breast refusal and fussiness. So if your baby's going really well and you get to 4 months, you don't need to put this into play. You only need to put this into play if your baby's refusing a feed. And you also need to look at milk supply. Is there a reason that your baby's getting more fussy? Is your milk supply dropping? If you are mixed feeding, yes, it probably is dropping. Have you got your period back? You're ovulating? Is it a hormonal reason that your baby is getting a bit fussy?
And is that due to change of taste?
Yeah, so if you are pregnant, there's a little bit more colostrum that's made, and so your breast milk becomes a saltier taste. Some babies don't care about that, but some babies get quite annoyed. And also in the first trimester, you would usually have a lower milk supply. So some girls will have not enough milk in that first trimester. You also get quite sore nipples when you're pregnant again. So often there's that subconscious that you don't really want to feed because, you're nauseous and you just feel gross. So it can be quite hard to feed through the first trimester. If you did feed through that and you got to the second trimester, though, things usually settle down and your milk supply settles and everything goes okay. So some babies don't care, but some babies really don't like the taste and they'll just fuss. And then if you're not pregnant but you're ovulating and you start to get your period again, then you're going to have lower milk supply a couple of days around ovulation and then a couple of days around when your period comes as well, which is going to make babies fuss at the same time.
So what would be a possible explanation behind a baby that is feeding well but just there's 1 to 2 fussy feeds of the day?
Yeah, okay. So that would depend, I guess, when the feed was. If they were fussing towards the end of the day, it could be related to overtired, or it could be related to your milk supply. It gets a little bit lower at those times of the day. It could be related to when the frequency of feeding, when you're actually feeding baby. Does baby want to be fed then? Look at when it is, how far it is from another feed, when did they have their sleep. Just plot out your 24-hour day and have a bit of a look, because if there's a one feed of the day that your baby is just fussing and doesn't want, and you keep pushing that feed and they don't want it at the end of the day, often it's better to just not try then and try in half an hour's time or something. Because if you are pushing a baby to the breast and they are pushing back and it becomes a fight every day to have that one extra feed, it's better to just step away and give them that time and try again, or go to the room and do a side-lying feed on the bed, or feed in the carrier when you're out and about. Because if a baby starts hating feeds, they will then refuse other feeds. And then there is always the risk of a breastfeeding aversion, where a baby just stops wanting to feed altogether. And Because they feel this as soon as they get to the breast, because they're going to be pushed there, they get this adrenaline. And if a baby gets an adrenaline rush every time they get to the breast because they don't know if they want to feed and they're going to be pushed there and it's going to be pushed in their mouth, as soon as adults even get adrenaline, your appetite is diminished. And so they straight away would not want to feed because they don't like that. So keeping breastfeeding really happy and carefree and not pushing is better in the long run for your baby because we won't see that aversion.
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, that's 9 months, they also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram, what are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybeeonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply. I wish I'd spoken to you 9 years ago because this is bringing back my second and third experiences were much better, but my first baby, I found breastfeeding so hard, and I think I did all these things, everything that you're talking about with the fussy feeding. It happened to me. I'm sure I was creating that aversion by desperately, it's a really tricky stage, right? Because the mum's desperate. They think, my baby wasn't putting on weight, or the maternal child health nurse might be saying that they're not heavy enough, and then they're pushing away from you. It
is really hard, and it's very easy to talk this through in theory, but when you're there with the emotions, and I've been there, I've breastfed my 3 children, and my first child, I was going through all of this, even though I was trained in it, I was still going through all of this, and I was still trying to push my baby to the breast, and he still refused. And, it's very different when you were there, but to always keep in mind, I guess, when they are fussy, that there is going to be a reason, and we just need to work it out, and you can get back. It's just the more we stress and push, the harder it is.
So would you say fussy feeding is normal, or would you say it's common, but it's something we need to focus on? What would you say?
So fussy feeding in the first 3 months is not normal. So there's a reason. If your baby is not feeding well and pushing on and off the breast in those really early months, that's not normal. There's a reason for that. But fussy feeding 4 months and over, I would consider normal. If your baby is refusing feeds, well, no, that's not normal. But just being fussy at certain times of the day, your baby doesn't want distractions. They want a quiet room. They don't want to feed at certain times. They want to feed only when they go to sleep or when they just wake up. They don't want to feed when they're playing on the floor, or they don't want to feed in certain positions. That's normal. That's just a baby growing up. And if you think about it as toddlers, when you're, or over 6 months, when you're trying to learn how to give solids and they're refusing solids, they suddenly refuse all their lunch for 3 days in a row. It's the same thing. It's just as they get older, they just realizing cause and effect, and they don't want to right now. Or we've just got to always look at the day. Don't always look at one feed and stress. Just look at your day and be like, have they had enough breastfeeds today? How many breastfeeds have they really had? And then you probably will realize, actually, they've actually done really well, and they were just fussy on the one feed. That's fine. We often look at one feed and we'll think about that feed, but we will forget about the 7 other good feeds that we've had in the day.
Yeah. Okay. I think this goes on nicely to my last question, which is a big question. What would be your top few tips for mums for surviving this or thriving through this fussy period?
Yes. Okay. So firstly, in the first 3 months, if you've got a baby who's not happy at the breast, the biggest thing is to get professional help. So seeing an IBCLC is essential for continued breastfeeding, as essential as going to the GP for something, as essential as seeing another health professional for a different ailment. if you are struggling through breastfeeding in those early days and you don't know why, then if you don't see someone, chances are it's not going to improve, because it's like doing the same thing every day, hoping for a different outcome. It's not going to improve. So that's the biggest tip, is seeing someone. And seeing a lactation consultant, you can see them in many different ways. If you have birthed, certainly in Australia, if you've birthed in the public sector, there's usually a lactation consultant linked to you, depending on your hospital. But there's usually a breastfeeding clinic in the public sector that you could, if you were struggling, financially, to see a private one, you could hopefully get on the list to see them. But however, the problem is with the public LCs is that there's long wait lists. And I always feel that you need to see someone within 24, 48 hours. That's the problem. But otherwise, there's a lot. If you ask your child health nurse, often your maternal and child health nurse is a lactation consultant, and they can help you, or they can give you someone that can in your area. Otherwise, seeing a private LC, you would be able to see someone that day or the next day. And I think that that's probably the biggest tip for the early days, is to just work out what's actually going on. And then the tips for when you are having a fussy baby over 4 months would be to look at the times that they're fussy. Look at the times of the day they're fussy and work out if you can see a bit of a link. Try the pre-feed routine. So try what I spoke about and get baby ready for a feed. Babies absolutely thrive on routine. They want to know what's happening before it happens. They don't want to be kept in the dark. They don't like that. So you need to plan things and get them to know what's going on. And also, if you're looking at your milk supply, if you were to just pick up your baby off the floor and pop them at the breast, you would have a bit of a delayed letdown, because your body's not ready for a feed. So then your baby's then getting annoyed because they're waiting for 2 minutes for a milk letdown to happen. Where if you do the pre-feed routine, your body's also like, oh, okay, I know that it's going to be feed time soon. I'm going to let down quicker, and it's all just going to work a bit better. And the other thing is, if you're wanting to use bottles and breasts at the same time, you certainly can, and you can do whatever you want with feeding, but just to have it in the back of your mind that it's not often a long-term solution. I wish it was. I wish we can always do one bottle in 24 hours. That's not going to affect anything, but more than that, there will be a time that your baby will prefer the bottle. It will come, whether it's at 4 months, whether it's at 8 months. There will be a time where they're like, well, I'm going to choose one over the other.
I've spoken to quite a few mums whose babies only have a bottle during the day, but then they're happy to take the breast at night time.
Yeah, and that would work because they are doing sleepy feed to sleeps overnight and not alert feeds. And so that often will work for mums who go back to work and they give their bottles in the day. And then the feeds at night are very different, because they are more the sleepy feeds and feeding and then going straight back to sleep. And if it can work, it's amazing. And for girls that have to give bottles because they are out, you've just got to do the best you can. All you can do is give the bottles in the day and then do the breast if you can. And you can't really worry too much about it because it is what it is. But if your baby is starting to fuss and you are giving both, and you have an opportunity to not give both, going back to more breastfeeds will often get baby back towards preferring the breast again, because we often see lots of mums really stressed out about this. But if we look at it from a baby's point of view, they're making a preference. They're making a choice because they know what it's like to have both. And I guess because I see it so often, and in my practice, I would see breast refusal as, for an older baby, is one of the main reasons that I get contacted. I just see this so very often that we just look at, okay, why is it happening?
Oh, so really, when you think about going back to work, you often think about the practicalities like childcare arrangements. And then you suddenly think, oh my gosh, there's this whole feeding situation too, potentially. So
yeah, I know. And it is really tough. I went back to work at 8 months with my first, and I went back 3 days a week. And yeah, he did refuse breastfeeding by 9 months because he just wanted the bottle. He just loved it. And it was really very hard for me. But at the end of the day, I had to go back to work. We're working mums. often we don't have the privilege of not doing it. And so all you can do is try your best with breastfeeding when you're at home with them, and to realize that, you're doing your best and your best is enough. And if you are wanting to continue with expressing for your baby, if your baby did go to the point where the fussing turned to refusal, your baby is still getting your breast milk. Yes, it's going through a bottle, but your baby is still getting the exact same milk as they were getting if they were feeding from you.
Yeah, I love what you said in terms of everyone's just doing the best they can, and that's good enough.
It is. It's good enough. Absolutely.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Susie. How can the listeners find you? Because I know you have an amazing membership for breastfeeding mums. So tell us.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Susie Pratt Lactation or at susieprattLactation.com. And yes, so I also run the Australian Breastfeeding Podcast. I have about 60 episodes in there. I run the Breastfeeding Success Membership. So it's a program and a membership together. It's a program to teach mums how to breastfeed, and then the membership to continue with support as they continue with their breastfeeding. So that's my main way of working with ladies now. And I only see girls one-to-one that join the membership. So I'm really enjoying it. I think the girls are absolutely loving it and having not only the support but the education. It's a lovely way to help women.
Absolutely. So thank you. And I'll put all those links in the show notes. So thank you so much, Susie.
Always fun chat.
So before we sign off, please remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links at fitnessmama.com/podcast. So be sure to head there to find out how to connect with Susie and come and say hi to us. So send us an Instagram message, send us a DM, and let us know what you thought of the podcast. So have a fabulous day, everyone, and I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of the Fitness Mama podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.